Mike Tyson's Punch-Out was released on October 18, 1987. By that time, 21-year-old Mike Tyson had won his first 19 professional fights by knockout. 12 of them were in the first round. Many of his opponents were beaten before the bell even rang. Tyson described it this way himself. He said, "Most guys who I fought were pretty much intimidated. They lost the fight before they even got hit." To this day, Mike Tyson is one of the most intimidating boxers to have ever stepped into the ring. And somehow, Nintendo took that feeling, the specific dread of standing across from someone who could end you, and put it inside an NES cartridge. Punch-Out was not just a boxing game about memorizing patterns. It was a game about learning to keep your nerve against opponents designed to get inside your head. So how was a game built nearly 40 years ago on 8-bit hardware able to make you feel that level of intimidation before the fight even began? We need to get to the core of why Mike Tyson's Punch-Out holds up so well. It had great gameplay, memorable characters, satisfying mechanics. All of that is true, but what about the feeling of playing Punch-Out? Plenty of NES games had great gameplay, plenty had recognizable bosses, plenty of them had satisfying mechanics, but very few can make you tense up the way Punch-Out does. In most games, a boss is just something standing between you and the next level. In Punch-Out, opponents feel like they can rattle you mentally. Before the fight even begins, you see those giant sprites, what they look like, how they move to the center of the ring, and before the bell, you already have an emotional read on how the fight might go. But as it progressed, especially if you mistimed a few dodges and took a few blows, it wasn't long before you withered into a knockout. It's fascinating how this game erodes your composure. That's more than just memorable character design. That's the game making you feel the danger before you could ever understand it. Remember, this is all happening on the NES hardware. How was Nintendo able to make 8-bit boxers feel so threatening? Here's the problem Nintendo had to solve. How do you make a fun boxing game on a system not really capable of simulating all the nuances of real boxing? In reality, Nintendo had already partially solved this problem with the arcade version of Punch-Out. But the arcade version had an advantage. You played as a transparent wireframe boxer, which meant your opponent was always fully visible. The NES was not capable of rendering that wireframe boxer. So Genyo Takeda, who had designed the arcade original and was now directing the NES version, needed a solution. What he came up with was this: make the player character small. And that's how Little Mac was born. This was a hardware constraint solution. It was not a narrative choice. Takeda needed the opponent to be visible. So in order to do that, he shrank the player. In doing so, he built the game's most powerful emotional mechanic. The opponent always towers over you. Before a punch is ever thrown, before you know their pattern, before you know whether they're actually even difficult, the game has already told you who has the power. You are looking up. You are outmatched. But that size difference alone doesn't explain why Glass Joe feels harmless, King Hippo feels like a wall, and why Tyson himself feels like every gamer's worst nightmare. If it were just about size, every opponent would produce the same feeling, but they don't, which means Nintendo was doing something else to create the intensity, the intimidation, something more deliberate. With each new opponent in the game, Nintendo didn't just change the attack patterns, they changed the way each fighter made you feel. Takeda has said that the NES version made a deliberate shift from the arcade. In his words, "The arcade version was over in 3 minutes, but I added the memorization elements so you could play longer on the NES version." This was a way to make you spend time with each opponent, to study them, to learn what their weaknesses were and what made them dangerous. The roster is a difficulty curve, but it's also an intimidation curve. Nintendo didn't just make the next opponent harder. Nintendo gave each opponent a different way of getting in your head. It starts with Glass Joe. Glass Joe loses. A lot. His presence in the first fight is not accidental. It allows you to experience what the absence of intimidation feels like. Glass Joe does not make you nervous. He makes you comfortable. And in a game built on escalating discomfort, that's the whole setup. The baseline is established. You feel safe. Now the game starts taking that safety away. Another good example of this dynamic is King Hippo. When the King Hippo fight starts, it already feels unfair. And this is also not accidental. King Hippo is the only opponent in the entire game built from a completely original sprite, not a reused base model. Everything about his visual design communicates one thing: this man cannot be hurt. The player does not first learn King Hippo as a pattern. You learn him more as a wall. And then the game reverses that conclusion. His weakness is ridiculous and humiliating. Hit him in the mouth when he opens it, and his shorts fall down. That's the solution. That teaches the player something important that extends beyond this one fight. Intimidation in Punch-Out is not just about who hits the hardest. It's about who controls the emotional terms of the fight. King Hippo controls those terms right until his pants literally fall down. The lesson is not that he was easy. He was not at first. The lesson is that looking intimidating does not mean unbeatable, but in order to find that out, you must maintain your composure. In my opinion, the first Bald Bull fight is where the game significantly ramps up the intensity of this idea. Bald Bull's design communicates aggression immediately. His idle animation is not idle. He rocks, he shifts, he looks at you the way someone looks at something they're about to pound into the ground. But his signature move is where the intimidation becomes a clear mechanic. We're talking, of course, about the bull charge. He backs up, he starts bouncing, and you know that something bad is about to happen. The bull charge is not just a devastating attack, it's a warning. It announces itself, it gives you time to dread it before it asks you to respond. As a kid, even when I learned that there was a counter to this attack, I still preferred to just keep dodging it until the round ended. That's how much it messed with my head. I'm hoping I wasn't the only one. And then, of course, there's Mike Tyson himself. Now here's something interesting. Punch-Out was essentially finished before Tyson was even involved. The Japanese version had Super Macho Man as the final boss. Tyson was added at the last minute after Minoru Arakawa watched one of his fights and was struck by his power and skill. Nintendo paid $50,000 for a 3-year license. So Nintendo had built a game around opponents who increasingly made you feel outmatched. Then it placed the most intimidating boxer in the world at the end of it. The player who reaches Tyson has run the gauntlet, so to speak. As a gamer in the late 80s, it was a considerable feat just to make it to the final match against Mike Tyson. And so when you finally got there, you felt pretty good about what you'd accomplished, maybe even a little confident. And then Tyson's first punch arrives. If you're not ready, and the first time you are not ready, it knocks you down in a single blow. This is brilliant design, because the game has spent hours teaching you that when something looks and feels dangerous, it is. The knockdown is not just punishment, it's a confirmation. Your fear was not irrational. By October 1989, 2 years after its release, Nintendo had sold 3 million copies of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. During that same window in the real world, Tyson knocked out Larry Holmes in 4 rounds, then destroyed Michael Spinks in 91 seconds. The game and the man were feeding each other's mythos, and in living rooms across America, Tyson was piling up even more digital KOs against overmatched gamers. Because of his reputation in the real world and in the game, beating Tyson became a badge of honor. the kind of thing that's still impressive among retro gamers nearly 40 years later. Beating Mike Tyson meant more than mastering a game. It meant you had kept your composure against the same opponent who had gotten into the heads of so many other fighters before the bell ever rang. It's quite a remarkable accomplishment because the NES library is full of hard games. However, very few of them made you tense up the way Punch-Out did. That may be Punch-Out's most underrated achievement, and it didn't stay on the NES. The question many game designers kept returning to, whether they knew it or not, was the same question Takeda's hardware constraint forced back in 1987. How do you make an opponent get inside the player's head before the battle is even started? Later games had more tools, better graphics, cinematics, enormous arenas, but the principle is the same. Introduce the enemy as a presence to be reckoned with. Let the player feel the weight of what they're about to face. Punch-Out accomplished that with 8-bit hardware and a handful of animated sprites. Nintendo could not simulate every part of boxing, so they focused on the part that mattered most. What it feels like to stand across the ring from someone who rattles your nerves before the fight even begins. Looking back, it's clear that Mike Tyson's Punch-Out did not become unforgettable just because Nintendo made a great boxing game. It became unforgettable because Nintendo understood that winning a fight could demand more than just skill. It's true, a difficult opponent can make you focus, but an intimidating opponent makes the fight feel personal. And Punch-Out made every victory feel like more than just a pattern you had memorized. If you beat Mike Tyson, it did not just feel like a win. It felt like you had kept one of the most intimidating boxers of all time from getting inside your head. So now I'm interested in what you think. What game had a boss that got inside your head, and did that intimidation make the eventual victory feel bigger? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, happy gaming, my friends.